Have you ever worked so hard that your company stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as part of the machinery? That's exactly what happened to me. For 5 years, I kept an entire operations department running. Every crisis landed on my desk. Every deadline became my responsibility. Every time someone quit, their work quietly became mine. Management kept promising that help was coming next quarter. It never did. Then one day I made a decision that completely changed my life. I accepted an offer from another company. What happened after I walked out the door shocked even the executives who thought replacing me would be easy. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when a company mistakes loyalty for endless sacrifice. And trust me, they didn't realize what they had lost until it was far too late. The first time I realized my job had quietly become 3 jobs, nobody announced it. There was no meeting, no updated contract, and certainly no salary adjustment. One Monday morning, my manager simply walked into my office carrying 2 folders, placed them on my desk, and smiled. "Good news," he said. "You're the only person on the team who already understands these systems." I should have recognized that sentence for what it really meant. Instead, I thanked him. My name is Daniel Carter, and until 8 months ago, I was the senior operations manager for one of the largest logistics companies in North America. Officially, I supervised warehouse automation. Unofficially, I became responsible for inventory forecasting, transportation coordination, emergency supplier communication, and the software that connected every distribution center across the country. None of those responsibilities appeared in my job description. They simply accumulated over time because every time someone left, their work somehow landed on my desk. First, it felt like recognition. People trusted me. Executives invited me to meetings. Department heads asked for my opinion before making decisions. Whenever a shipment was delayed or an automation line failed, my phone rang first. I like solving problems. That's why I accepted the extra work. The company had hired me 5 years earlier because I specialized in warehouse optimization. Back then, the operations department consisted of 12 managers. Each person handled a clearly defined area. The workload was demanding but reasonable. If someone took vacation, another manager could temporarily cover their responsibilities. The system wasn't perfect, but it worked. Then came the restructuring. Corporate leadership called it operational efficiency. 3 management positions disappeared. The remaining employees absorbed the work. Everyone complained. Everyone was promised that replacements would be hired after the next financial quarter. Those replacements never arrived. 6 months later, another restructuring eliminated 2 more positions. Another manager resigned after accepting a better offer from a competitor. His projects came to me because I was already familiar with them. Then another colleague retired early. Again, I inherited his responsibilities. Every year the company announced record profits. Every year our department became smaller. Every year someone promised that relief was coming. It never did. I wasn't the only employee working long hours. The entire department was stretched thin. The difference was that my projects connected every other department. If purchasing changed suppliers, I had to update the forecasting models. If transportation adjusted delivery schedules, I modified warehouse staffing plans. If automation software received updates, I tested compatibility before implementation. Slowly, almost without noticing, I became the person who understood how everything fit together. That wasn't intentional. It simply happened because I stayed while everyone else left. One afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with my director, Michael Rhodes. "I need another operations manager," I explained. He nodded sympathetically. "I know. I'm working 60-hour weeks. I know. I've postponed vacations twice. I know. If I get sick, nobody knows how these systems work together." Again he nodded. "I completely agree." I waited. "So when are we hiring someone?" He leaned back in his chair. "Right now corporate wants us to keep labor costs flat." "I've heard that for almost 2 years. I understand." "No," I replied quietly. "I don't think you do." He sighed. "Daniel, you're our strongest manager." That sentence should have worried me. Instead, I mistook it for appreciation. He continued, "If anyone can handle this until next quarter, it's you." Next quarter. Those 2 words became a running joke inside the department. Every postponed project, every denied request, every hiring freeze, everything would magically improve next quarter. Of course it never did. The following winter our company secured the largest retail contract in its history. The CEO celebrated during a company-wide meeting. Record revenue, historic growth, unlimited opportunities. Everyone applauded. I did too. Then my inbox filled with new responsibilities. The client required customized inventory reporting, special transportation scheduling, dedicated warehouse allocation, real-time operational dashboards. Guess who built every one of them? 3 months later the new contract was running smoothly. The executive team received bonuses. The sales department celebrated another successful quarter. Operations received an email thanking us for our continued dedication. That was it. One email. No additional staff. No promotions. No raises. Just appreciation. One evening I was still in the office after 7. Most lights were already off. The cleaning crew had started working. I noticed Sarah, one of the financial analysts, standing near the coffee machine. "You still here?" she asked. "Trying to finish tomorrow's transportation forecast." She looked at the reports covering my desk. "Isn't that logistics?" "It is." "And warehouse planning?" "Yes." "And inventory allocation?" "Also mine." She laughed before realizing I wasn't joking. "Wait. You actually do all of that?" I nodded. She stared at me for several seconds. "I thought 3 different teams handled this." "They used to." That conversation stayed with me. Not because Sarah was surprised. Because someone from another department genuinely believed multiple teams were doing work that had quietly become one person's responsibility. Nobody outside operations even realized what had happened. The company still looked fully staffed on organizational charts. Reality looked very different. About 6 weeks later, corporate announced a leadership conference in Chicago. Attendance was limited. Most department managers weren't approved because of budget restrictions. 2 days before the event, Michael stopped by my office. "I can't make the conference." "Okay. I need you to represent operations." I almost declined. I had deadlines, projects, weekly planning meetings. Instead, I agreed. Seemed like a good opportunity. Looking back, that decision changed everything. At the conference, I attended presentations about supply chain resilience, predictive inventory systems, and warehouse automation. Most sessions were forgettable. One wasn't. After my presentation about reducing fulfillment delays through adaptive scheduling, several attendees approached me with questions. One of them introduced herself. "Emily Foster." She extended her hand. "I'm Director of Operations at Meridian Freight." I recognized the company immediately. They were one of our biggest competitors. "I enjoyed your presentation," she said. "You've built something impressive. It's been a team effort." She smiled politely. Experienced professionals know when someone is being modest. "I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit." We spent nearly an hour discussing industry trends. Not confidential information. Nothing inappropriate. Just 2 operations professionals exchanging ideas. She asked thoughtful questions. Questions nobody inside my own company had asked in years. Before leaving, she handed me her business card. "If you're ever curious about how we handle large-scale operations, give me a call." I thanked her and slipped the card into my notebook. At the time, I honestly believed I'd never use it. I still thought things would improve. After all, next quarter was only a few weeks away. The conference ended on Friday afternoon, and by Monday morning I was back in my office, buried beneath spreadsheets, shipment reports, and production schedules. It felt as though I had never left. By noon I had already solved 3 warehouse issues, approved next month's transportation plan, joined 2 executive meetings, and answered over 80 emails. The stack of work waiting for me was larger than before I had gone to Chicago. No one asked how the conference had been. No one asked what I had learned. The only question my director had was, "Did everything stay on schedule while you were gone?" "It did," I replied. "Good." That was the end of the conversation. A week later I prepared another staffing proposal. This wasn't the first one. It was actually my 6th. I included workload statistics, overtime reports, employee turnover numbers, productivity trends, and industry benchmarks. The conclusion was simple. Operations needed at least 4 additional managers to maintain service quality. Without them, we were depending too heavily on one individual. Me. I wasn't trying to sound important. I was trying to eliminate a business risk. The executive meeting lasted 45 minutes. The chief financial officer barely looked at the presentation. "We appreciate the analysis," he said. "But hiring isn't in this year's budget. Our workload has increased by almost 60%. I understand. Our largest customer alone added another distribution center. I know. We're operating on borrowed time." He folded his hands. "Daniel, you've always found a way." I heard those words differently this time. Not as confidence, as expectation. They no longer believed the department needed help. They believed I would simply continue carrying the workload. After the meeting, Michael caught up with me in the hallway. "Don't take it personally." "I don't. They're under pressure. So am I." He nodded. "I know." There it was again. "I know." Everyone knew. Nobody acted. Over the following months, I stopped volunteering for additional projects. Not because I had become lazy, because there simply weren't enough hours in the day. For the first time in years, I started leaving the office around 6 instead of 9. The difference was immediate. Emails accumulated overnight. Reports arrived a day later than usual. Managers who had always assumed instant responses suddenly had to wait. One afternoon, the vice president called me directly. "I've noticed some delays." "There are. Is something wrong?" "No." "Then why are projects taking longer?" I answered honestly. "They're taking the amount of time they should have always taken." Silence. "What do you mean?" "I've stopped working 15 extra hours every week." Another pause. "I wasn't aware you were doing that." Exactly. Nobody had been. My overtime was invisible because I was salaried. The company simply assumed everything happened naturally. Around that same time, I received an email from Emily Foster. It wasn't a job offer. It was an invitation. Meridian Freight was hosting a roundtable discussion for senior operations leaders. A dozen professionals from different companies would discuss supply chain resilience. No recruiting. No interviews. Just conversation. I almost declined. Then I remembered something. In nearly 3 years, nobody at my own company had invited me to discuss ideas. Only problems. I accepted. The meeting took place on a Saturday. The discussion lasted almost 5 hours. For the first time in years, I sat in a room where people genuinely cared about improving operations instead of simply cutting costs. Nobody interrupted each other. Nobody dismissed concerns with "next quarter." People debated ideas. They challenged assumptions. They listened. Afterward, Emily and I walked toward the parking garage. "You seem exhausted," she said. I laughed. "Is it that obvious? You answered every operational question today before anyone else." "I've had a lot of practice." She stopped walking. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How many people are on your management team?" 5. "And how many actually remain?" I looked at her. "How did you know?" "Because I've seen that look before." She smiled sadly. "I used to work for a company that expected one manager to replace an entire department." I didn't answer. She continued. "If you ever decide you've had enough, call me." Again, not a job offer. Just a sentence. One that stayed with me for weeks. Autumn arrived, bringing our busiest shipping season. Every distribution center operated around the clock. Demand reached record levels. One Friday evening, a software update failed during deployment. Normally 3 specialists would have handled the issue. There were no specialists anymore. Just me. I worked until 4 in the morning rebuilding warehouse synchronization. Saturday afternoon, another problem appeared. A transportation routing server stopped communicating with regional warehouses. Again, I fixed it. Sunday morning, my phone rang before breakfast. A supplier's inventory feed had crashed. By Sunday night, I had worked nearly 36 hours over one weekend. Monday morning, I walked into Michael's office. "I'm taking 3 vacation days next month." He looked surprised. "That's difficult. I have an unused vacation from last year." "I know. We're too busy. We're always too busy." He rubbed his forehead. Can you postpone it? I already postponed it twice. I'll see what I can do. 3 days later my request was denied. Operational necessity. Those 2 words finally broke something inside me. Not anger. Not resentment. Clarity. I went home that evening, opened my laptop, and updated my resume for the first time in 5 years. It took almost 4 hours. Not because writing it was difficult, because I had forgotten how much I actually did. The document looked unreal. Warehouse operations, inventory forecasting, automation planning, transportation coordination, supplier integration, crisis management, data analytics, software implementation, business continuity planning. Reading it felt like looking at the resume of 3 different people. The next morning I sent exactly 1 email. Not to a recruiter. Not to dozens of companies. Only to Emily. Thank you for the conversation in Chicago. If your offer to talk still stands, I'd like to hear more about Meridian Freight. She replied 22 minutes later. How about lunch tomorrow? That lunch lasted almost 3 hours. She never criticized my employer. She never pressured me to leave. Instead, she described how Meridian operated. Every major process had documented backups. Every management position had cross-trained support. Nobody carried an entire department alone. Professional development wasn't treated like a luxury. Vacation wasn't considered a disruption. Managers were expected to build teams that could function without them. One sentence caught my attention. If someone becomes irreplaceable, Emily said, we consider that a management failure, not an employee success. I had never heard an executive say that before. For years I'd believed becoming indispensable was the highest compliment. Now I realized it was actually a warning sign. Before we left the restaurant, Emily placed a folder on the table. We're opening a new regional operations director position. I looked at her. I haven't even interviewed. She smiled. This isn't an offer. Then what's this? A job description. I opened it. The salary alone was nearly double what I was earning. Then I read the rest. Performance bonus. Profit sharing. 6 weeks of vacation. Leadership development budget. Most importantly, a team of 7 experienced operations managers. I closed the folder. I'll think about it. Emily nodded. Take all the time you need. I drove back to my office in complete silence. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering whether I deserved something better. I was wondering why I had convinced myself that what I already had was normal. For the next 2 weeks, I said nothing. I continued showing up every morning at 8. I attended the same meetings, approved the same reports, solved the same emergencies. If anyone noticed a change, they didn't mention it. The only difference was inside my own head. For the first time in years, I stopped imagining myself retiring from the company. Instead, I began asking a simple question. What if I left? The answer became obvious almost immediately. Nobody could tell me who would take over my responsibilities. Not because my coworkers weren't capable. They were. Several of them were exceptionally talented. The problem was that everyone already had full-time jobs. No one had the time to learn the dozens of interconnected systems I managed every day. That wasn't their fault. It was management's. For nearly 3 years I had repeatedly asked to cross-train other managers. Every request had received the same answer. We'll organize it after the busy season. The busy season never ended. One Thursday afternoon, Michael walked into my office carrying another folder. I've got one more project. I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. What happened? Jennifer resigned. I closed my laptop. So her accounts are coming to me? Only temporarily. I almost laughed. Like the last 6 temporary assignments? He didn't answer. Instead, he placed the folder on my desk. We appreciate everything you're doing. There it was again. Appreciation. Always appreciation. Never solutions. That evening, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my office looking at the city's lights through the window. 5 years. I had given everything I had to this company. Missed birthdays. Canceled vacations. Worked through illnesses. Answered calls during family dinners. Not because anyone forced me. Because I believed my effort mattered. Maybe it had. Just not to the people making decisions. The following Monday, I accepted Meridian Freight's invitation for a formal interview. There were 4 interviews over 2 weeks. None of them felt like interrogations. Instead of asking how many hours I could work, they asked how I developed teams. Instead of asking whether I could handle pressure, they asked how I prevented burnout. Instead of asking whether I could solve every problem myself, they wanted to know how I built systems that didn't depend on one person. It was an entirely different philosophy. During my final interview, the company's chief operating officer asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. What accomplishment are you most proud of? I expected to describe our largest customer rollout. Instead, another answer came out. I've kept a department functioning despite years of understaffing. He smiled politely. I believe you. Then he asked something unexpected. What would you have accomplished if you'd actually been supported? For a moment I couldn't answer. Nobody had ever asked me that. I had spent years explaining what was broken, never what was possible. 2 days later Emily called. We'd like you to join Meridian as Regional Operations Director. I thanked her. Then she continued. I also want you to know something. What is it? We're not hiring you because you're willing to sacrifice your life for work. I stayed quiet. We're hiring you because we believe you'll help build an organization where nobody has to. I accepted immediately. My start date was 4 weeks away. The next morning I requested a meeting with Michael. He walked in smiling. I hope this isn't another staffing proposal. It isn't. I handed him an envelope. He looked confused. Then he opened it. His expression changed instantly. This is your resignation? It is. He looked back at me. I wasn't expecting this. I know. We can work something out. I've been trying to work something out for almost 3 years. He leaned back in his chair. Is this about money? No. Then what is it about? It's about sustainability. He frowned. I don't understand. I believe you. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Finally he asked quietly, where are you going? I've accepted another position. Can I ask where? Meridian Freight. His eyebrows rose. Our biggest competitor? Yes. He sighed heavily. When did this happen? It didn't happen overnight. That answer seemed to hurt more than anything else. Because it was true. People rarely leave suddenly. Most leave mentally months before they resign. The paperwork simply comes later. By the afternoon, word had spread throughout the building. Coworkers stopped by my office one after another. Some congratulated me. Some looked genuinely worried. Others asked the same question. Who's taking over your work? I gave everyone the same honest answer. I don't know. By the end of the day my calendar was completely full. Knowledge transfer meetings. Documentation reviews. Transition planning. Ironically, I had requested exactly these meetings for years. Now everyone suddenly considered them urgent. I spent the next week documenting every process I could. Not because I owed the company anything. Because I respected my colleagues. They hadn't created this situation. Management had. Late Friday afternoon the vice president asked me to stop by his office. He closed the door behind me. I've reviewed your personnel file. I waited. I wasn't aware of how many responsibilities you'd accumulated. I documented them. I know. Another familiar sentence. I know. Except this time he sounded genuinely uncomfortable. He opened a spreadsheet on his monitor. We'd like to make a counteroffer. The salary increase was significant. Nearly 30%. 6 months earlier I would have accepted immediately. Now I barely looked at the number. I appreciate the offer. But the problem was never only my salary. We can discuss additional compensation. I asked for people. He stayed silent. I asked for training. Silence. I asked for succession planning. More silence. I asked for help. Finally he nodded. We should have listened. It was the first completely honest sentence I'd heard from senior leadership in years. Unfortunately, came 4 weeks too late. My final week passed faster than I expected. Every morning someone stopped by my office with another question. Where is the weekly forecasting template? Which warehouse handles emergency overflow? Who approves the supplier exceptions? How does the transportation model calculate seasonal demand? None of the questions surprised me. The answers had always existed. Every procedure was documented. Every workflow had been written down. The problem wasn't missing documentation. The problem was that no one had taken the time to learn it while I was still there. For years I had asked managers to schedule cross-training sessions. Those meetings were always postponed because everyone was too busy. Now they were trying to compress years of accumulated knowledge into 5 business days. That simply wasn't possible. On my last afternoon, Michael walked into my office carrying 2 cups of coffee. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, he broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." I looked at him. "I should have pushed harder." "You did push. But not enough." He wasn't wrong. I convinced myself things would improve. So did I. He stared out the window. "I honestly believed corporate would approve the hires eventually." "I believed that too. I never expected you to leave." I smiled faintly. "That's exactly the problem." He looked confused. "You assumed I'd always be here." He nodded slowly. "I guess we did." We shook hands before he left. There was no anger between us anymore. Only regret. At exactly 5 o'clock, I placed my company badge, laptop and office keys on my desk. 5 years of my career fit into a single cardboard box. A framed family photo. A notebook. A coffee mug with a faded company logo. A few books about operations management. That was all. As I walked through the lobby, several warehouse supervisors stopped to wish me luck. One of them smiled. "They don't realize how much you actually do." I answered honestly. I don't think they ever did. Outside, the spring air felt strangely different. Lighter. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't vibrating with emergency notifications. No one called before I even reached my car. No crisis. No last-minute shipment. No overnight system failure. Just silence. Monday morning I arrived at Meridian Freight 20 minutes early. Emily was already waiting in the lobby. "Welcome aboard." Instead of walking me directly to an office, she introduced me to my entire leadership team. 7 experienced operations managers. Each responsible for a specific region. Each with clear authority. Each capable of covering another manager's responsibilities if necessary. The difference was obvious within the first hour. People asked questions. They challenged ideas. No one expected one person to have every answer. During our first planning meeting, I noticed something unusual. One manager disagreed with Emily's proposal. Instead of becoming defensive, she thanked him. "Let's hear another perspective." The discussion lasted 30 minutes. Everyone contributed. The final decision was better because of it. Driving home that evening, I realized something. I hadn't solved a single emergency all day. Yet more work had been accomplished than during many days at my previous company. Because healthy organizations don't depend on heroes. They depend on teams. 3 weeks later, my former employer called. It wasn't Michael. It wasn't human resources. It was the chief operating officer. "Daniel, thank you for taking my call. What can I do for you?" "We've encountered some operational difficulties." I had expected that eventually. "What kind of difficulties?" "Our forecasting process isn't producing reliable inventory recommendations." "I see. Our warehouse scheduling is also falling behind." I remained quiet. "We're hoping you could help us understand what we're missing." I chose my words carefully. "Everything you need is in the documentation. We've reviewed it. And it's more complex than we realized." Of course it was. Not because I had made it complicated. Because the business itself had become complicated over years of expansion. The documentation explained every process. What it couldn't provide was experience. The COO cleared his throat. "We'd like to hire you as a consultant." "I've already started my new position." "We understand. We're prepared to work around your schedule." I thought for a moment. "I'll consider it under 3 conditions." "I'm listening." "First, I won't return as an employee." "Understood." "Second, every meeting includes the managers who will actually perform the work." "I'm not interested in explaining the same process repeatedly." "Agreed." "And third." I paused. You must begin hiring the operations team I've been requesting for years. Silence filled the line. Finally he answered. We've already approved 4 new management positions. That surprised me. What changed? His response was immediate. We finally understood the cost of not listening. Over the following month I spent 2 afternoons helping them organize a proper transition. Not because I owed them anything. Because dozens of hardworking employees still depended on that organization. The difference was remarkable. This time executives attended every session. They took notes, asked questions, assigned backups, scheduled training. For the first time in years, someone was actually building a system instead of relying on one person. Before our final meeting ended, the COO stayed behind. I've been reviewing old staffing requests. I smiled. There were quite a few. There were. He looked genuinely embarrassed. You predicted almost every problem we've experienced. I wasn't predicting anything. He looked up. I was describing what would eventually happen if nothing changed. He nodded slowly. I wish we'd realized that sooner. So do I. 6 months later I attended another industry conference. This time I spoke about operational resilience. Not software. Not logistics. People. I explained that the strongest organizations are not the ones with the smartest employees. They're the ones where knowledge is shared, responsibilities are balanced, and success doesn't depend on one exhausted individual carrying an impossible workload. After the presentation, several managers approached me. One asked a question I'll never forget. So what's the secret to building reliable operations? I smiled. It isn't finding irreplaceable people. The room became quiet. It's building a company where nobody has to be. The audience applauded. Later that evening, Emily joined me outside the conference center. You know, she said, your former company has been copying several of our leadership practices. I laughed. I hope they keep going. She looked at me curiously. You're not bitter? I thought about it for a moment. Months earlier, I probably would have answered differently. Now the answer felt obvious. No. Why not? Because the best outcome was never watching them struggle. She waited. The best outcome was proving that people perform their best when they're trusted, supported, and given the resources to succeed. She smiled. And how's that working out? I looked across the conference hall where my team was laughing together after another successful presentation. Managers who respected one another. Leaders who shared responsibility. Professionals who could all take a vacation without the business falling apart. Exactly the kind of organization I had spent years trying to build. I'd say, I replied, it's working exactly the way it should. And that, more than any promotion, salary increase, or apology, was the real victory. Not that my former company finally understood what they had lost, but that I had finally found a place where I was valued before I had to prove I was indispensable.